Welcome to the Pure Parenthood podcast, brought to you by Purebaby. I'm your host, Tiffany Wells, and I'm the head educator here at Purebaby. Hi everyone, our guest today is Tara Mitchell, who's a sleep specialist and mother of two. I've had the opportunity to work with Tara over the past few months and it's been an absolute pleasure getting to know her. Today's episode is all about sleep tools and tips for the first 3 months, and we'll answer some of the most frequently asked questions by first-time parents. Thanks so much for coming on today, Tara.
Yeah, it's such a pleasure to be with you guys. So thank you for having me, and I'm really excited to have a chat all about baby sleep.
Great. Baby sleep can be so tricky to navigate, particularly during the newborn phase. So knowing everything possible about exactly how sleep works for little ones is so important and a good road to start on when trying to promote a healthy sleep and sleep habits. To kick off today's episode, could you tell us a little bit more about how you, started up becoming a sleep specialist and how you started the Gentle Sleep Specialist and about your experience a bit, Tara?
Yeah, of course. So I have always been around babies and kids. My mum has been a pediatric nurse for, into 30 years now. But I began nannying. So I was a nanny overseas and nanny at home, then went through university and then went into pediatric nursing. So my entire early adulthood, I guess you could say, and late teens was all around kids and babies. I've always gravitated towards them. And then from there, I went into pediatric nursing for a number of years before I had my beautiful little girl, Scarlett, who's now 6. So Scarlett was a terrible sleeper initially, which was really tough at the time. I'd always worked with babies and kids, so I kind of went in thinking, I've got this, and she turned my ideas upside down. But of course, that became the greatest blessing, right, because it got me into this. So when she was probably about 6 months old, that's when I began, in terms of getting into the training of becoming a sleep consultant, and then started the business soon after. So I combined my 15 years of experience, and I've since also obviously worked with thousands of families across the globe, but I've also since had a little boy as well, Tommy, who's now 4. So yeah, basically I work with families one-on-one or through online programs, and we work to get all on top of sleep habits and create healthy sleep habits and also resolve sleep issues because it's a really big topic for families. So yeah.
Wow, thank you for sharing your story today with us. I think it's so great to actually know a little bit about someone's background and how they came to be in the role they are today. So you've said sleep deprivation doesn't have to be a part and parcel of parenting a newborn or toddler. I think that's definitely something every first-time parent wants to hear. I also suffered with severe sleep deprivation with my first and even some with my second and third babies, so I totally get it. I was definitely one of those mums who thought I could do it all on my own and tried to manage it all. Even though I really didn't have any idea about what I was doing, I suffered in silence like a lot of parents do, I think. So what are some of the first bits of sleep advice you could share with us today, Tara?
Yeah, sure. So firstly, sorry to hear you had such sleep deprivation. I think it's just so common. There's a number of things that kind of, play into how we get into the sleep habits and get into that idea of thinking that it is just a part of parenthood when it really doesn't have to be. And it just affects so many different levels of your life and relationships and also your baby. So their immune health and their development and, their ability to cope with their day, growth, you name it, feeding issues. They're also closely intertwined with sleep issues. So it's definitely not a badge that you want to be wearing, by surviving 3-4 years of sleep deprivation. So for sure, I think it's such a good thing when I see people reaching out. But yeah, with little one sleep, I always sort of say that there's actually a number of things that happen in sleep. It's not a stagnant state. So basically our little ones in the first half of the night, particularly the first 4 to 5 hours, they get into their deepest sleep at that point. And that is where so much of the processing happens. So a good way to look at it is that during the day they're learning, during the night it's like a storage system of files and it all gets filed away in their deep sleep. So that's where they create those pathways, the memories are created, and they can consolidate the skills that they're learning when they get into that deep sleep. And then so little ones actually spend quite a bit of their sleep process in light sleep sleep also. And there's so many different things that happen for their brains and for their bodies in terms of releasing growth hormones and tissue regeneration during that sleep as well. And so it's never just a stagnant state. And at around 4 months, our little ones tend to become quite cyclic with their sleep cycles, so they become more defined. So during the night, for example, at 4 months, their sleep cycles become between 60 to 90 minutes or 90 minutes to 2 hours. And during the day, they're 30 to 50 minutes. So hence why we get the cat napping that can happen as well, especially if the little ones aren't, good at getting into deep sleep rhythms as well. So they have much lighter sleep than us overall. They tend to, be quite shorter in their cycles of sleep, but it does not mean at all that they can't get into good rhythms of sleep. So we'll talk a bit more in depth about how to get our little ones into a really rhythmic sleep cycle, because that's where the body's able to do what it needs to do during those times, and our little ones will stop that light sleeping all the time. And it's almost like I'd say that little ones with poor sleep habits, they tend to appear to sleep with one eye open. So parents are like, as soon as I move them, as soon as I take my hand off them or pull the breast away, they just wake up, but that often comes into, what sleep cycle they're in and how the quality of sleep that they're getting is. So we'll get into that as well.
Yeah, perfect. I'm sure that lots of listeners at home are so glad that they're tuning in today. I would have got so much from listening to a podcast like this before I had my first precious baby, that's for sure. So what are some of the other tips that you would give around newborn sleep? Because I think we're really trying to target, that first-time parent, really helping them out in that first little while. So newborn sleep can be so hard to work out. So what would be your top tips around newborn sleep?
Sure. Yeah, so firstly, I think it's really important to keep in mind that babies who are overtired have higher levels of your stress hormones, so your cortisol and your adrenaline. So they actually physically find it much harder to wind down, right? And the other thing is that they also don't know how long they've slept for. So what we want to keep in mind with our little ones is that for some babies, temperament plays a really big role. You'll just get some people who have that sleepy baby. It doesn't matter what they do. They sleep through the night and they're just, they're all over it. That's just their temperament. The type of babes that I work with are the ones that are alert from day dot. They kind of almost like they've been here before. You give them a minute, so take them out. They're just aware. Yeah. And they are more prone to actually getting really wired. So it's actually not that they need less sleep, even though they may appear that way. It's actually that they're much more easily stimulated. It's like they've got a million more senses of the world around them, and so they're just so easily stimulated. So I think first things first is going to be offering them lots of opportunity for sleep, and actually recognizing that young babies will need up to 16 to 19 hours of sleep. So newborns, you're really looking at quite a lot of sleep in a 24-hour period.
Wow.
So with that being said, it's crazy. They really shouldn't be doing too much more than being awake, having a feed, changing our feed back down, that sort of idea, especially when they're young and they're taking quite some time to feed. So first things first is that I start to create some consistency and some predictability around their sleep, and also just focus on their each, section at hand. So when you're feeding, the most effective thing you can do is start to create a pattern of, now this is our feed. So let's work on a good, effective feed at that point. And that might be engaging them a little bit more, making sure that you're not getting too stuck in a snack feed and snack sleep pattern.
Yep.
So what will happen with a lot of young bubs, that they'll get on the feed, fall asleep for 5 minutes. They'll wake up after about 5 minutes, or if you try and move them, then they'll cry. Then we're like, oh gosh, they haven't really had a proper feed, but they're fighting their sleep now. So then, just put them back on the breast or back on the bottle, for example. Then we try and give them another feed, and then they fall asleep, and we get really lost. So if we can try and focus on an effective feed, a proper feed, almost like a meal. So I almost want you to see each section as like a meal of, a feed time, and then a meal of sleep, if that makes sense. So then when you come into that next stage, it's like, right, now they're due for sleep. We can rule out the feed. They've had a good feed. Now let's focus on getting them good sleep. And you might just, for example, change their nappy beforehand, pop them in there, wrap them up, whatever it might be. You might sing a lullaby but you don't need to get too ritualistic about it. But creating some sense of, pattern in your day can be really beneficial, because our little ones are made to learn patterns and associations. So starting to, to allow them to recognize what's coming next is really important too. And one thing that I think is just such a top tip for parents to know overall is that your little one doesn't know how long they've slept for. And so if they're falling asleep for 5 minutes on a feed, or staying really dozy on feeds, which is very normal, or falling asleep in the car for 5 minutes, then it might be that you feel you've spent your whole day fighting them to go down for a nap, but actually your baby's counted that 5-minute doze as a nap, and that 5 minutes here is a nap, and being zoned out on your shoulder during the burping part is a nap. And so it's going to become more important to keep them more aware in their awake time, so they still have an appetite to go for sleep, right?
Yeah.
One of my most common things that my newborn parents will say is that their little ones don't sleep all day. And then when I ask them, okay, but does your bub get zoned out or drowsy, on feeds, I'll say, yeah, and they've had 5 feeds in the day. So in their mind, though it's not enough, they think they've had 5 little kips. So that's really important to keep in mind. And so the other thing is that I really encourage my parents to look forward and go, right, what are the things we wish to keep around? So within that first 3 months, your little ones are absolutely, like, their brains, the plasticity is beyond incredible. And so they're starting to recognize, like, oh, this plus this equals sleep, for example, or, they'll start to know as soon as you unclip your bra, for example, they'll be like, oh, they might see the bottle. They just cannot wait another second, because they know what it all means. They start to recognize that when this happens, this happens. And so I would encourage parents from the start to go, right, if we down the track, or, from day dot, want our little ones to know their sleep space, so to be in their bassinet or to not have a dummy all the time, then we need to look at what are we encouraging them to learn. And so I would be like having them in their bassinet for sleep, for regular opportunities to get to know that space. That doesn't mean you can't have those sleepy newborn cuddles on your chest, but what will happen is that around that 12-week mark, your bugs wake up, and they kind of, like, it's harder to get them to sleep on your chest, during the Netflix times and things like that. So it's more important to sort of recognize that offering them, the opportunity to get to know what we want to foresee is going to be really important. And if we're co-sleeping with them when they're newborns, do we want to see that around as they get older? Is that sustainable, considering, you might be going back to work and things like that? So I just keep an eye on what we're doing to induce sleep, because it will absolutely become a very big sort of reliance on them, because that's what they will then associate with going off to sleep as well. So, yeah, and just keeping bedtime positive. So just, for example, not putting too much stress in, being able to recognize, okay, well, my little one's just fighting this sleep at the moment because they probably, got too sleeping on their feed, or they thought that was enough. So then just, let's have some more awake time, let's then maybe go for a walk, in the pram, and see if they want to have a doze, that sort of, thing as well. Because it's very easy to sort of say, like, I'll sleep when they sleep, but sometimes that's not possible. And sometimes we're really heightened in terms of our adrenaline and our, hormones during that first, 6 weeks. So it can be really tough to get that rest. So try not to put too much pressure on your sleep or on their sleep, and just, stay relaxed with it, and just sort of recognize, okay, let's just offer these opportunities. If things aren't working quite like that, let's pop them in the carrier and go for a walk, that sort of thing. So just trying to remove some of the pressure around sleep as well can be quite beneficial. So
yeah. I think having all of these tips and tools and better understanding why babies do what they do is so helpful, because it can be a minefield, I think. So what are some of the other key points to consider when it comes to knowing how much sleep the baby should be getting and why? Because I think this is another big question, and you've explained a lot already, but I think delving a little bit more into, how much sleep they should be getting and why they should be getting that sleep, I think is key to understanding this a bit more too.
Yeah, absolutely. And, people give you a timeline of excuses, basically, as to why your little one should be a poor sleeper or might be a poor sleeper. But I just don't work with babies that can't sleep well. And I don't get caught up in, you have to swap to bottle feeding. That's going to be a better option. It's really not most of the time, unless there's significant feeding issues, of course. So you'll need to follow, guidelines in terms of baby's weight and that sort of thing. And, of course, always follow SID safe guidelines. But basically what I would say is that people will get it caught in excuses. So, at 4 months there's a regression, and then by 6 months they get separation anxiety, and 8 months there's developmental leaps, and they're going to be teething throughout, and then you're going to get leaps throughout, and then at 12 months they're walking, so that's another regression. And I literally, write out a timeline of the excuses, but it doesn't have to be the reason, right?
Yeah.
So just recognizing that and going, if I have had, thousands of clients across the globe, and we get on top of what they recognize as sleep, because babies are born to develop these patterns, as I spoke about before. And so what we want them to understand is that sleep is internal. It's autonomic. They were born to sleep. It is sleep. It is the same idea as breathing, that sort of thing. But if we are constantly not giving them the opportunity to try and settle, or their own space in their, in their bassinet, or if we're rushing in at every peep and murmur, or we're constantly going, right, sleep on the breast, sleep, dummy in, sleep, rock, that sort of thing, that's when they start to learn or come to understand, like, oh, I'm awake. Right, the brain is just going to create this pattern that goes 1 + 1 =. So it's going to look for what you've done a number of times before in order to induce sleep then, instead of it just remaining there thing. So they start to externally reference the idea of falling to sleep. And so that's when we get caught up in this, these wakings and things like that. So irrespective of teething and regressions and wherever you're at, little ones do. At 4 months, they go through an absolute change in their sleep cycle. So at 4 months, for example, they become very defined. So instead of having, these lengthy newborn cycles, they're essentially going 30 to 50 minutes during the daytime and then 90 to 2 hours at night. So it's like bang, bang, and they're becoming awake more in between each of these cycles. But that doesn't mean that they have to actually awaken to the point where you need to constantly play those roles, right? Because they can get into a deep sleep from the beginning of the nighttime, they will drift through rhythms of good sleep, and that's where the magic happens, right? So they don't have to wake up enough to get the dummy put back on the breast, be picked up and rocked. They'll be able to get into these really rhythmic sleep cycles. And we've seen this through studies through SIDS, babies who externally reference sleep, for example, with the dummy. And some babies sleep beautifully with the dummy, so don't get me wrong, but I'm just using that as an example. Their sleep cycles are so much more disjointed because they have to wake to a much larger degree in order to get the prop back in to then get back off to sleep. Whereas little ones who don't have those externals, they're much more likely to get into a deep sleep from the beginning of the night, right? So it's just almost like something's tapping them on their shoulder when they have to be aware that something is there, needs to be there. Is the breast being moved? Are they being moved? That sort of thing. So yeah, so it's just important to not get too caught up in the excuses around poor sleep or the ones that you might be told. Then what I would sort of say in terms of their sleep requirements and understanding is that little ones, for example, they typically would need a little less sleep before they go down for their first nap of the day. So for a newborn, so for 3 months and under, you're really only looking between an hour and an hour and a half awake time all in all. I would say pay attention to if they're getting really drowsy on feed. So for example, if you kind of go, okay, they woke at 7 a.m., but they've spent, if we say, right, they're due to go down at 8 or 8:15, but they've spent 40 minutes of that half asleep on a feed, you might need to consider that they might need a little bit more awake time. So definitely keep an eye on what's happening on their feeds. If they're really awake during the feed, then for sure they might be absolutely ready to go down by an hour and 15 later. But I often find little ones need a little bit less awake time before the first nap. And then as the day goes on, they start to increase their awake time a little bit more before second, third. Newborns can need between 4 or 5 naps a day. Easily. So they might sort of span it out to say an hour and a half before those later naps, maybe even hour 40, and then back to an hour and 15, sort of hour and a half max before bedtime. So it kind of goes like less, out, and then less again. And in that time you'd be getting them up. They can have some tummy time, then feed, trying to focus on a good feed, then a cuddle and play, and then back down again. So they really don't have too much time for too much else other than that. So yes, I tend to find and their first and second naps eventually will be the ones that start to that remain. So you'll find that often your third and fourth naps will become shorter and shorter. So they're sort of your cat naps. Whereas nap number 1 and 2 will be the ones that, you eventually want to get more than an hour, and they start to pull those out to become, so I sort of say it's like a cliff. So the 5th nap drops off eventually, 4th nap, 3rd nap, and your 2 shuffle out. And they would be on 2 naps up until around 15 to 18 months. So,
yeah, wow. Thank you so much. I think all the first-time parents out there are really appreciating this in-depth insight. So, because it's, it is so daunting, and it's hard to know what's going to happen. Yeah. So having a bit of an idea before you bring your own little one home, I think is just imperative. So now another question I have is, in your view, Tara, when couples start their parenting journey, what are some of the things that you feel are most important with regards to taking care of yourself and each other during this initial period? Because I think having a baby is such a massive adjustment, and keeping all of those things in mind and knowing a little bit about your advice around that, I'd really love to chat through that a bit more with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel so passionate around this in particular as well. Obviously, I see parents who have gotten really to beyond a wit's end. And I don't just say this because I am a sleep specialist, but I say this from a very sincere point of view, that sleep is sincerely a game changer in terms of the outcomes of relationships within the home, and also just mental health and the baby's temperament and their coping ability and their feeding. So a lot of my clients would say my little ones have got reflux or feeding issues, but often it's once we get on top of sleep, we just see things like iron out. It's pretty remarkable. So I would say, first of all, make that a priority and don't feel that there is a badge. There is absolutely not. If anything, most of the parents that I work with who have waited till their little ones are much older, and it's become quite an angst time. It's almost like an anxiety develops around bedtime when they've had poor sleep habits for so long. There's so much pressure and emotion attached to that. And so I would just say, remember first and foremost, there is help there. You're not going to get the badge at the end of that sleep deprivation period. And so the next thing I would say is don't overschedule. So we are just so inclined these days to be pressured to, they have to be doing sensory classes, they have to be doing jungle, the baby gym, they have to be doing baby massage and this and that. And those things are really, they're great if you want to schedule them in for your own sake as well. So going to baby massage, it might be that there's, a group of people around and parents, and it's a nice opportunity. But don't feel like you've got to schedule a weekend of swimming, this, that, every day, because I tend to find that less is more, without a doubt. You don't need, for example, to buy every gimmick in the market in terms of all the sleep things and the stars on the roof and all of that sort of stuff. We want to simplify this early part. We, just simply flat nap time for your little one to roll around and to start to get that strength up and to lay there and look around and watch you and engage with you. Like, that is their entire world, and that is what they need at that point. But also it can be quite a pressure and quite stressful for us to try and be at certain places on certain times, because you've got to feed here and feed there and that sort of thing. So I would just say don't overschedule. I would definitely recommend, where you can, just trying to remove things like, don't worry about getting a house, done and dusted before your little one goes down. So then, it's all nice and neat for just, I guess, not sweat the small stuff for a while. And that can be difficult, because especially if we're people who have always had things a certain way, you kind of have to let that go to a degree initially and just be like, you know what, let's get Bub off to bed. Let's wait till our partner gets home, for example, and then we'll tackle it together. Not everything has to be signed, sealed and delivered by 5 o'clock, in the afternoon. So keeping that in mind as well. And I would just say create touch points for you and your partner, and that might be just that on Friday night, Uber Eats. On Friday night, we do snack platter, with cheeses and whatever else. And you will not feel like that at times, but you'll never regret it when you do it. And I do think that what I see is an absolute loss of relationship, especially among sleep deprivation. And the best way that I can put this is that whilst we always put our babies first, we have to remember that connection essentially is the cradle that holds the baby, and eventually the roof that becomes their head. So if you imagine joining our two hands together in that partnership. So of course, whether or not that's singular or with a partner, singular again, taking those opportunities to be able to, have a touch point for, I just walk with my friends on a Friday morning, or, I invite my girlfriends over on a Friday night, for example, if you are solo parenting. So just having these points for ourselves during the week are going to be really important to keep that connection. And I can really resonate with this because I felt like I was so busy, and I had the business at some point, as well. And I couldn't be bothered, but I really regret not having that connection, because I feel like I very much missed it as I went along, and just allowing either yourself and or if you're in a partnership to have those things that might make them feel who they are. So for example, if you used to play netball on a Tuesday, trying to get back into that, or you used to do, an RPM class on a Friday morning, or your partner likes to go play basketball one evening a week, like those sorts of things that remind ourselves of who we used to be are actually really important for our soul during this time. And it allows one another to come back and be better in terms of like just be in a better space and that sort of thing. So just, certain gestures that might help, making big meals time so you can freeze them, and also just leaning on the help that you might have around you. It might even just be for some company. If you're not good at asking for help, that's fine, but just having somebody over to spend some time with you can be really important too. And I think just parents recognizing that this is the greatest shift, essentially, is the one that affects financials in terms of drop of wage. It affects our social life, it affects our mental health, it affects our sleep, every element of our life. And so we need to recognize that there's going to be a shift within who we are for a little while and who our partner might be. And I think one of the biggest things that I see, and this is obviously a very big generalization, is that as the mums particularly, we get very good at saying, oh, I'll just do it, or no, I do it the right way, or that sort of thing. And we tend to, take over or just quickly do it ourselves because it's easier, or we know how to do it the right way. But that can also lead to quite a loss of confidence in our partners too, or it can cause them to take a big step back. And so I think I would always love my new parents to recognize that and go, you know what, they will always find their own way of doing things as well, or they'll become better at doing it, with that confidence and with that space to do so. So allow, that partnership to come into play, and just have empathy towards one another, and just know that it does settle, and, the newborn period is very short. It's very intense, but it's very short, and it will be okay.
Yeah, I think this is often forgotten and not considered enough in the big scheme of things. So thank you for shedding some light on this today. I think before we finish up, what are some of your most asked questions that you get from first-time parents? Because I think having a few answered right now might be really helpful out there to all those people listening.
For sure. Yeah. So the 4-month sleep regression is huge. That's what I get asked the most likely. And that essentially is when your little ones come between 3 to 4 months of age normally, and they actually start to wake a lot more overnight, or they start to cat nap. They primarily do that if they've become very aware or very reliant on something external to put them to sleep. And so what actually happens, I like to call it like a 4-month milestone, because it doesn't have to be a regression if your little one has the ability to go down and understand how to fall asleep and, get into deep sleep cycles. But what happens, as I mentioned briefly before, is that their sleep cycles become very defined. So instead of drifting between these, really non-existent sort of or lengthy sleep patterns, they become quite defined and quite short. And so if your little one is already on light sleep, instead of drifting between light and deep sleep, they're now drifting between light and awake if they already have, if they sort of have light sleep cycles, or if they tend to be a baby who's quite reliant on you needing to do things in order to get them to sleep. And so they drift into these awake periods more regularly, or these light periods, I should say, ideally, and they should just be able to get into the next rhythm. But if they need you in order to induce sleep, because that's what you've always done, then that's when the 4-month sleep regression, let's call it, hits. Because not only are they, becoming more defined, which doesn't need to mean poor sleep habits if they can get into good sleep and recognize what to do to get back to sleep. But what also happens is that at 4 months, they're waking up, they're aware now, they're becoming more used to the patterns and more reliant on, what something equals, or, what needs to come into play. And I guess you can just say that they develop that, more awareness. And so it's kind of like the perfect storm if they don't have, those deep sleep cycles and that healthy ability to be able to recognize sleep independently. So that's what that is. And that's where, then obviously you get the significant cat napping or the waking lots in the second half of the night, or the waking every 2 hours. So, and another question I get asked is, when should I think about, getting on top of sleep habits? And I would just sort of say that for the first 3 months, you're learning, they're learning, you're establishing feeding initially, and you can offer their sleep space, as we spoke about earlier. You can put those top newborn tips into play. Then between 3 to 4 months onwards is when I'd start to really look at, okay, like, is this something we can sustain? Is my little one getting the quality sleep they need? And if that's a no, that's when I'd definitely be looking at, right, let's start to get them, more effective sleep patterns and deeper sleep and that sort of thing. So I'd go from there and do it from there. So, and especially we're in winter now, so it's freezing. So a lot of people would say, like, how will I know if my baby is cold? And what I would sort of keep in mind is that during winter, your main thing for the room temp is actually just to make sure that you're kind of removing the chill. So you just want to take the chill off. You don't really need to use heating to degrees of warming the room. So you definitely want to use like something but more to take the chill off the room. So if you think of it that way, and then of course you want to go with, your onesies and your sleep suits and that sort of thing. And so the way that you could tell is that, for example, they might have, persistent waking in the early hours of the morning, all of a sudden coming into these colder months, or they might seem really restless through the night, unable to get into a deep sleep. Now, these things can also be obviously poor sleep habits, but it can also be that they are cold, so they might seem even more active than what you'd imagine. They might be struggling with weight gain, for example, because they have to burn energy to stay warmer. And basically, I would just check their torso. So just making sure that their torso feels warm, when you do go in to do a feed or that sort of thing. So having sleep sacks that have a really quality fiber made from breathable materials, that is what is so important, because that way we're keeping our little ones warm and safe at the same time.
Great.
And I would just say probably the last thing is that your little ones are going to be light sleepers. So I get this question a lot, and that is because they spend more time in their active sleep, so their REM phase, whereas as adults, we spend less, whereas babies spend a lot more time in their active sleep cycles. But again, the things that can contribute to that light sleep might also be that they're always aware that something needs to be there. So if you're sort of, trying to remove the breast, trying to lay them down as they're already asleep and things like that, that can obviously disturb their sleep cycles. Dummies, if they're, you'll see some bubs and they'll be asleep but they're sucking on their dummies, for example. It's kind of like, you're like, oh, you're almost half awake. So that sort of thing can affect their ability, and coldness as well. So those are the normal things that would, possibly play into why they seem to be a light sleeper.
Great to have some answers to those FAQs, and thank you so much for your time today, Tara, and your wonderful and oh so helpful knowledge, because I think what you've shared with us today has been really insightful. I'm sure everyone listening today got so much out of the episode, so thank you again.
Oh, thank you, Tiffany. It's been a great chat. Thanks for having me.
Well, if you'd like to learn more about baby and toddler sleep, please head over to gentlesleep.com.au. They have so many amazing online resources available. You can also find them on Instagram at the Gentle Sleep Specialist. Be well, and hope you have all a good night's sleep tonight. And after listening to this episode today, I'm sure everyone will sleep a little better. Thank you so much. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time to tune in today. I hope you found this helpful. Don't forget to subscribe and tell your friends about this podcast. And if you like listening, please leave us a review. See you next time.